So today I want to go over the most important information you need to know to maximize your damage in Diablo 4. And you'll have probably heard of this concept being referred to as buckets. And we're going to be using this spreadsheet made by Snowraven, but tons of other people throughout the community have done a ton of testing to get this information to where it is now. And with all of the reviews coming out for Diablo 4, all this information has seemingly been confirmed that this is how it is working currently in Diablo 4. And the basis of this concept is that all the damage modifiers in Diablo 4 are split into a handful of different buckets, and this is represented in this spreadsheet through different colors. Now, how this works is all of the different damage modifiers in a specific bucket will be additive when you get multiple of them. So as you can see, there's a ton of different gray damage modifiers in this chart. So say if we had damage versus distance, that gave us a 20% increase to distant enemies. So that would be in that first bucket. But then we also added damage to frozen into that bucket as well, and that would give us 20% increased damage to frozen enemies. Now, if we had an enemy that was at a distance and frozen, we would be getting 40% increased damage to them. So it's additive. But if you bring in a second bucket and say have critical strike damage in that second bucket, that would be multiplicative with that first bucket, generally meaning that getting bonuses from as many different buckets as you can is going to give you a lot more damage than stacking all of the effects from a single bucket. So you could get all these different effects from this gray bucket and stack them in that bucket, but they would only all be additive with each other, and they wouldn't give you as much damage as getting damage modifiers from all of the different buckets. And currently we have technically 6 buckets, but kind of more like 5 because attack speed bonus is kind of its own bucket, but it doesn't actually scale your damage. That obviously just scales how quickly you can use most abilities. So this would still increase your overall DPS, but it wouldn't scale your damage in the same way as other abilities. And we also do know certain abilities in the game also have their own attack speed multipliers. So there could be some instances in where attack speed bonus would actually be a better effect to get than any bonuses from any of the other buckets. But that's going to be something that requires a lot more testing. And these buckets are pretty easy to understand once you know where these different damage modifiers come from. And the first one being X percentage damage. And this comes from all the passives throughout your skill trees and things like legendary aspects or unique items. This would generally be considered to be the most important modifier, or the modifier that would give you the most damage. Then you have the primary stat, and that changes on whatever class you're playing. And the primary damage modifier coming from your primary stat is just an increase to all skill damage. Then you have attack speed bonus, which, like we went over, doesn't actually scale your damage, but you can attack quicker, meaning it can still give you a damage increase. And I think attack speed bonus isn't going to be needed or optimal on all builds, but some builds this will probably be incredibly strong. And then you have all the critical strike chance and critical strike damage modifiers, and this will also change depending on what class you're playing on. So something like a druid will also have critical strike damage with werewolf, or just the different elements they're using. And then you have the plus damages, which is everything in gray, and the first one being just plus percentage damage. And don't get this confused with X percentage damage. And I think Path of Exile even differentiates these two damages, plus being increase and then X being more, kind of an easier way to understand it. But then you have all the plus damage to effect, basically. So plus damage to CC, plus damage to elites, plus damage to healthy enemies. All of these type of plus damages are also going to be in one bucket. And I think this is probably going to be the bucket where you have the most different modifiers added on top of each other. And I think that's also going to be one of the areas that people get the most wrong by just trying to stack as many of these different modifiers instead of getting modifiers from the other buckets. And then we have vulnerable damage. And I think vulnerable damage is probably going to be the most important effect in Diablo 4 by far. And I think as we get more into the game, pretty much every build is basically going to be required to have ways to apply vulnerable consistently, and most builds will probably be running an increase to that vulnerable damage. And this is definitely a concept you're just going to have to start to use and get used to and keep practicing with to understand how to make the most powerful builds you possibly can. And following these buckets is going to allow you to get the most damage out of whatever build you're trying to go for. Because at the end of the day, I think there's going to be quite a lot of build variations and different very strong builds because of the fact that there's going to be so many ways to get so many different damaging effects that I think most builds into the end game will have some way of getting damage effects from every one of these buckets. And I think that's going to be one of the main things you're going to have to look out for when creating any build you're looking for or any build you're trying to make work. But that's pretty much all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.